The name of this panel is the 99% crossing the divisions among us versus the 1%. My co-chair is Nina Lopez, who is a big point of reference for us in the strike generally and at Crossroads. We wanted to end with what has been essential always to us, and that is how you cross the divides, because there is no other way to be anti-capitalist. Our view is that capitalism is precisely the divisions among us, and only when we cross those divides, and in the course of crossing them, we are building the movement against capitalism and liberating ourselves and each other. We got a letter. I want to start before I call the first two speakers, who will be Nell and Sam, NGOs and trade unions. Well, now this is a big step forward. When, 40 years ago, I said trade unions were a problem, I was witch hunted for some years. I survived, however. No, they won't. After I spoke at Occupy in Oakland, in an extraordinary tour of a number of cities to publish this book, I found that Elaine Brown, who has a son in a Georgia prison, who was part of the strike of Georgia prisoners, which was organized across race and religion in Georgia. No small thing, says the lady on my left. We had been in touch. Nikki and I had called her. I had met her in 1969 when she was the leader of the Black Panthers in Los Angeles, and I'd gone to see her on a visit to the United States. And then I heard that we heard about the prisoners' strike, and then I heard that there was this network of parents and others in support outside. I said, oh, Elaine Brown, I know her. And recall, of course, she didn't remember me, but she did speak to me a bit. And then I tried to be in touch with her when I was in the States. And finally, after I'd spoken, she came over to me and embraced me warmly. She liked what I said. And then when I got back here, she wrote this letter. Hearing your powerful words, the passion with which you spoke simply inspired me, elevated me, if for no other reason, to see another comrade still standing. That means she had seen a lot of comrades who fell. As I mentioned, until Occupy, the seeming abyss of years of the absence of action of a movement, I had been muddling along, working, though despairing. The bright light of the Georgia prisoners' strike has already been snuffed out by bootlicking Negroes in powerful places and the entrenchment of reaction. It's not quite that bad, but you see what she has experienced. This is what I want to point out. Until Occupy. The point is, I was truly gratified by your talk, grateful to hear another voice of rage and commitment to revolutionary change. In the meantime, as I mentioned, I want to connect my daughter, etc., who's had a very bad experience with rape, what else, and who wants to be in touch with people who can be useful to her. And then she says, if you want to talk sometime, as you said, you have access to a very cheap telephone line, give me a call. And she gives the number and signs it with Revolutionary Love. Now that gives some idea of what people have been through and what we are coming out of at this moment in time, of which I think this conference is for me a significant part. We are breaking a lot of bounds here. We are telling a lot of truths here. We are not inhibited to speak the truth here. We're not scared to speak the truth. We think that this talking of this truth is the precursor of setting ourselves free. When we say 99, when the Occupy movement said 99%, it means that 99% are against them. That there are 99% of the world's population which is opposed to the 1%. But what it doesn't say, as we have been describing today, how different and how many conflicts there are among the 99% which we have to deal with, which we have to address. And the other thing that it doesn't say is who are the 1%. So this panel is about the 99% and the 1%. And we start with two parts of the 1% that sometimes are and sometimes are not the movement. That is, they're the 1% one day and the 99% another, and we have to distinguish what they are which day. So we begin first with Nell, who is going to tell us about her experience with NGOs.
Thank you, Selma. So I am delighted to be here to talk about my experience in the NGOs. I have had experience on every side of it. I can't say that I am of the 1% because I'm not. But I can say that I have worked in organizations that, despite our best intention, the work that we were doing was actually supported the goals and the aspirations of the 1%. The thing that's really tricky about it is that our intention in working inside those organizations has been to serve the community. But the structure of the NGO is such that you have to be in constantly vigilant and committed to undermining the 1% and the divisions among the 99 in order to not actually be in service of the 1%. So starting really in the 80s, when I moved to California, it started earlier than that. I mean, I've been involved in NGOs really, for most of my adult life in one capacity or another. I have worked in both the rape crisis movement, the battered women's movement, right? Those things started as movements, but over the course of the time that those movements have been in existence, they got taken over by the goals of by the 1% in their aspirations and professionalized, right? So that we take the movement out of it and then start providing services. And then what happens with the services is that the people who are then employed providing the services are dependent. And then the need for the violence that we actually were organizing against gets reinforced because our budgets require that we have victims in order to keep providing services, right? So it's an ugly mess, frankly. I've also been the executive director of an organization that was focused on addressing the divisions among the 99%. And our work in that organization was, I think, some of the best work that was done, but my consciousness about that work has changed over time. So everybody here is aware that there was a Black Power movement in the United States that was really a threat to the 1%. I mean, it was really a threat to the 1%. And many of the leaders in the Black Power movement were murdered, incarcerated. Some of those folks are still in jail. Russell Maroon Schultz is one of those people. And so what happened in the U.S. was that the repression of the Black Power movement, they knew that that would not last. And so they put in place a set of NGOs that were focused on alliance building, which I think is a good thing. I think we need to be in alliance with one another. But one of the things that I've, looking back, realized is that my moving into a job doing movement work meant that, again, that the salary that I was being paid, I was dependent on that, and the work that we were doing was designed not by the community. I can speak up. The work that we were doing was designed not by the community, but by whatever the needs of the funders were, to put a good face on their their abundance of unearned privilege. The distribution of wealth in the United States is something like the top 10% control something like 50% of the wealth. The top 20% control something like 94% of the wealth. And so there have to be many things in place to maintain control over the 90-some% of us who are trying to split up about 8% of the wealth. And that, in fact, the work that I moved into, this alliance building work, as I look back, I realized that was a watering down of the Black Power movement, so that the work that we began doing had much less focus of justice and equity, and it had more focus of getting to know each other, which is not a bad thing. It's good to know each other, right? But what I realized is that it was a substitution for the population. So then our work became being a buffer, really, between those at the very bottom and those at the very top. So those of you who were here yesterday know that for 5 years I took care of my mother in her last days, and then I spent 2 years unemployed trying to find my way back into the workforce. And I was hired recently at an organization that does housing counseling, which is, again, that's the thing that's kind of slippery about the NGOs. Is like, people need to be able to get help if you have a bad landlord, right? Or if your house is being foreclosed on. We need those services to people to be able to help us defend ourselves in the immediate moment. But the idea that that's the end of the work is really problematic, right? I mean, it brings us to a point where we are stabilized, but then we really need to move on to the point where we don't have any landlords at all, because all rent really is robbery, as far as I can tell. Housing is a basic human right. So I landed at this housing organization, and part of what we decided to do in response to the outrageous situation in the States, where there are 8 or 10 empty homes for every homeless person, right? I mean, we have homeless people, and we have homes without people, and it seemed like that is such an egregious situation that something more dramatic had to be done about it. So I'm in a housing organization. The decision was made to take a house that was owned by Fannie Mae. And for those of you who don't know, Fannie Mae is the 99% funded but not controlled government agency that supports low and moderate income people to get homes. So it seemed like an abuse of their power to have a home that they let sit empty, while, again, there's so many homeless people. So with Occupy and some other of our community members, we organized to take a home one of the amazing things about Occupy, I mean, I know that there's a whole history of squatting here in the UK, and there is some history in the US, but it's much less developed. But it's growing because of course, because the homelessness really encourages people to take action in their own defense. So we organized a march and had a team that went into the home in advance and made it available for us to enter, which we did do. And it was actually a tremendous victory because it's, you know, a way of saying to the U.S. government that we are finished, really, with the idea that we would sit with our needs unmet and, you know, and the capacity to meet our needs just, you know, sitting right next to us. So there were some of the folks who had been evicted, brutally evicted from the plaza outside of the mayor's office, the city hall in Oakland, who were then homeless. I mean, they had been living in tents, and the police beat them, tear gassed them, you know, rousted them, brutally arrested a bunch of people. And so with some of those folks, we took a house, and our thing was on yesterday, this house was empty. Today, it's a home for some people who were homeless, and we're providing services for this community that need services. And we had a tremendous amount of support. It was amazing. Immediately, the neighbors began to drop off food. They brought air mattresses, they brought pillows, they brought plants, they brought furniture, they brought, you know, one day I was there and a flatbed truck pulled up and a refrigerator was offloaded, okay, and carried up the steps by 3 guys who lived upstairs. I was like, okay, it can be done, right? We're showing them it can be done, and that's really the threat to the 1%, that actually it can be done. So long story short, we were there for about 3 weeks. We got a notice to relinquish the property. In the U.S., probably here too, there are laws that protect people who establish tenancy. And so we had done the paperwork to say that we were challenging possession, because when you're inside and you have the key to the door, then who actually has ownership can be challenged. And so that's what we were doing. So we received a notice in the mail that the realtor and Fannie Mae were asking us to relinquish the house. About a week after that, I got a call from one of the guys who was living there and said, the locksmith is here, the police are here. So we rushed over there, the folks who we were working with, and within maybe about 45 minutes or an hour, there were 20 cops that showed up, entered private property, which is against the law, and arrested 12 of us from the property. The thing about the NGOs that I think Selma wants me to say is that this decision to take the house was actually, you know, a sound decision, it seemed, on the part of the NGO. But what happened when we got arrested was that it became such a threat to the NGO to stand behind us that they actually began to shrink away from the very powerful decision that they had made to take the house, and they kind of left us out in the hanging in the wind. So I did go to jail that night, and with 5 other women and 6 men, and because they really didn't have legal grounds, because it was a civil matter. It should have been referred to court. Nothing really ever came of the charges, but I did get a real big dose of what it means to once again be inside of an NGO where their priority is in fact the organization and not the community, because there really was not a solid defense weight leveled by them. They really were not willing to call down to the mayor's office. I was like, who's calling to see who signed off on that? Because somewhere in the hierarchy in the city, there had to be somebody who was responsible for that decision. And so I was challenging the fact that nobody inside my organization really stood up to say that that was a problem. And I pretty much got the silent treatment and ignored. So I continue to be at that organization because for all the reasons, but I'm in daily struggle with them about it, because wherever it is that I go to work and however much people pay me, I tell them right from the start that actually my accountability ultimately is to the community. And so I want to be clear about that, and I actually appreciate the support that I get to hold that line, because I feel like that it needs to be where the accountability is, because the reality of our budgets in the NGOs is that it is our money of the 99%, because the 1% who formed the nonprofit status, they are families who have stolen money from for decades, and in some cases hundreds of years, centuries, and continue to use the leverage that they have as the rich to extract resources, natural resources, human resources from us and our communities. So I just want to say that it's great to be here and get support, really, to be accountable, because I feel like that actually improves my quality of life and the quality of life for my community.